If you decide to challenge America's experiment in democracy, it's going to be your worst day. Those were the words of the US Defense Secretary as he unveiled America's new defense strategy, which will now primarily focus on deterring Russia and China.
We will continue to prosecute the campaign against terrorists that we're engaged in today, but great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security.
OK, our correspondent Igor Zdanos has been following this story. Igor, what exactly is this power for battle, power competition that James Mattis has been talking about?
Well, first and foremost, Neil, US offense strategy is a more apt name probably for the document that has been unveiled today. And this competition, this great power competition he's talking about, is something the United States military hasn't been focusing on since the Cold War. So really, this hasn't been the primary focus in decades. So this doctrine, I should say, that has been unveiled is a reminiscence to those times, really. It's like a bit of a return to that era. And it also means that the infamous war on terror, has sort of taken a backseat. It's been put on a back burner, and instead Washington has Russia and China in its sights. And here how they justify such choice.
We face growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia are from each other. Nations that do seek to create a world consistent with their authoritarian models, pursuing veto authority over other nations' economic, diplomatic, and security decisions.
So, authoritarian model, this is how the United States apparently see Russia's and China's geopolitical goals, geopolitical ambitions. Now, these are, of course, not the only two countries on the list of bad guys drawn up by Washington. Iran and North Korea, they've always been there, they remain there, and Washington wants to challenge them and to compete with them as well.
The doctrine calls for modernization. What would you expect to see?
Well, this is something that Mattis used the word phenomenal to describe, phenomenal modernization. First of all, we have to look at space, cyberspace, and also nuclear. Now, we know that in terms of cyberspace warfare, the Pentagon are going to be creating a whole new department, apparently, a whole separate unit to look into this and to develop, I don't know, defense strategies in cyberspace. Also, Washington is planning to work on expanding its nuclear program, and they're saying it's in response to Russia's and China's actions.
I'm going to try and play devil's advocate here. I'm going to say that a defence secretary never wants his budget to get smaller. His main enemy, Islamic State, has all but disappeared.
Not the main enemy anymore.
Not the main enemy anymore. Well, isn't this just about building up an enemy to justify getting more money in? Tell us more about the money.
Well, you're absolutely right. They want more money, and Mattis has talked a lot about how budget cuts have dealt more damage to American national security than anything else, really. So obviously he wants more money, and this new document is all about more troops, more weapons, more everything, and this doesn't come free. But what we have to also realize is that the Pentagon spends a lot of money on projects like the F-35 fighter jet or the Columbia submarine, and these are the projects that have been in development for many years. In terms of the F-35, it's been decades, really, and that thing has not been past the most basic development stages even yet, despite hundreds of millions of dollars splashed out on this. So really one should also look into how the Pentagon spends the budget it is being given, rather than just how much.
OK, many thanks. We've got a good picture of what's going on there. Igor, thank you. OK, let's get more analysis now. Political analyst Charles Ortel comes in. Charles, you've had a chance to sort of understand what's in this doctrine now. What do you make of it as an American? Do you feel safer?
Well, the first thing I'd caution is that Donald Trump has said many times that the United States under the Trump administration is not going to telegraph its plans. So if we're expecting to get, a precise forecast of what the Trump administration is going to do militarily, it's not in that document. I think that document, as you correctly point out, is an argument for more budget authority. And as a taxpayer and a concerned citizen and a numbers person, I look at the number $562 billion in spending, and that's the public number. We don't know how much additional money may be off the books. That is an enormous amount of money for a nation as small as ours in terms of people. We're a quarter the size of China, roughly twice the size of Russia. And our, stated defense spending is a mammoth sum of money. Given all the cost overruns I've seen in the past, I am uncomfortable just throwing more money into a black box here, and I'd like to see some real accountability for what we spend. I mean, that's, after all, more money than the gross domestic product of, I think, all but about 20 countries out of 200 on the planet. So I start there. I also just, I don't have access to classified information, but I think, Russia and China clearly have to defend territory, whereas the Islamic State, what's left of it, and radical Islamic terrorism do not. So I would disagree, just as a citizen and not a military expert, with the notion that, we don't have as much to fear from radical Islamic terrorism. I think we do. I think that ideology has not yet been fully discredited. It could spring up again. And so, those would be my headline reactions.
OK, there was a point, I understand, during the speech where James Mattis made a threat. Let's have a listen to what he said.
And to those who would threaten America's experiment in democracy, they must know if you challenge us, it will be your longest and your worst day.
So he was pretty clear, but when he says, anyone who challenges our democracy, that makes me think they were making that claim of Russia interfering in their elections. So it could really be applied to anybody they want. What's your interpretation of it?
I think it's a blanket statement. The ability of, who was it? The Romanian hacker, in his spare time out when he wasn't gardening, was able to penetrate into the most secret parts of Hillary Clinton and, various other Washington insiders. So the threats, cyber threats, I think, emanate from all around the world, from the poorest corners on Earth that are connected electrically. So I don't know that it was necessarily a specific threat against Russia, and more likely just simply, putting people on notice. We will not, we will run the internal affairs of our country, and outsiders better not try to interfere.
Yeah, that was kind of general. A bit more specific was the statement that there's an intention to counter Iran by setting up a regional coalition. What kind of fruit do you think that strategy might bear?
Well, in Iran, I'm somebody who was in university in 1979. I vividly remember what happened then in Iran. Indeed, my own family was going to move to Iran prior to that, when it was possible for Americans to flourish in Iran. I look at the last almost 40 years now of Iranian experimentation as a disastrous period, not simply for the Iranians, but for neighbors, and now elements within Iran are interfering throughout the Middle East, even in South America. And I think it's a good thing, actually, that the United States is standing up and saying, listen, we're just not going to tolerate this anymore. And by the way, instead of wasting all this money on your military and your adventures, how about taking care of the people who are rioting in the streets? So I think that's fair, frankly, for us to point out.
Charles, appreciate your time. My guest, political analyst Charles Ortel.